Let's get right into one of the most puzzling and honestly terrifying chapters in modern history, the rise of the Nazi Party. We're going to explore how a tiny, almost irrelevant political group just exploded and became the most powerful force in all of Germany. And that's really the core question, isn't it? In 1928, you have to understand the Nazis were basically a political joke. But by 1932, just 4 years later, they were the biggest party in the entire country. So how on earth did that happen? And so fast. Okay, so this right here, this gives us our first huge clue. Just look at the relationship between these two things. In 1928, unemployment is at 1.5 million, and the Nazis have a measly 12 seats. Then, look at 1932. Unemployment has shot up to 6 million, and Nazi seats, they've skyrocketed to 230. I mean, the connection is just undeniable. It seems like desperation was the rocket fuel for the rise. Right, so let's start right there with that economic desperation. It all kicked off with a financial earthquake that began thousands of miles away, but the shockwaves hit Germany harder than almost anywhere else. It was October 1929. The U.S. stock market on Wall Street completely crashes. Now, you might think, okay, that's an American problem, but it wasn't. See, Germany's whole economy had been propped up since World War I with massive loans from American banks. So when Wall Street collapsed, those American banks panicked. They called in their loans, basically saying, we need all our money back right now. For Germany, the result was a complete and total economic meltdown. And we have to remember, this wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was a human disaster. This account from an eyewitness, wow, it just paints such a grim picture of what life was like for millions. People weren't just out of a job, they were losing all hope, just stuck. An atmosphere like that is fertile ground for some really radical ideas. And to put a number on that despair, get this. By 1932, the average German worker's income had dropped by 40% from what it was just 3 years before. 40%. Just try to imagine nearly half your paycheck just vanishing. That was the crushing reality for an entire nation. So the economy is in an absolute freefall. And what happens when people lose their life savings and their jobs? Well, they tend to lose faith in the people in charge. And Germany's democratic government, the Weimar Republic, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. And this slide just lays it out so perfectly. Look at the government's response on the left. They're cutting spending, cutting benefits for the unemployed, basically making a terrible situation even worse. They looked weak, they couldn't agree on anything, they were a mess. Now, look at what the Nazis were promising on the right. Simple, powerful stuff. Work and bread. A strong leader. Making Germany proud again. If you're starving, which one of those sounds better to you? And Hitler himself just hammered this point home again and again. With this quote, he's tapping right into that public frustration with the chaos of all the different political parties arguing. He's saying, I'm not one of them. I'm the guy who's going to clean up this whole mess. You can see how that would be a really seductive message. Of course, it's one thing to have a simple message. It's another thing to get that message out to millions of people. And this brings us to our third key ingredient, the Nazi propaganda machine. These guys were, frankly, masters of persuasion, using modern tech and psychology to build a massive movement. Their strategy was just so sharp and effective. First, it was all about building this cult of personality around Hitler, presenting him as the only man who could save Germany. Second, they used technology that was cutting edge for the time. I mean, they were flying Hitler all over the country in an airplane for rallies, something no one had ever done. They used radio, film, you name it. And third, the message itself was brutally simple. Your problems are not your fault. Here are the people you should blame. And you can't underestimate the emotional impact of all this. This quote from Albert Speer, who would later become a top Nazi official, really shows how the sheer spectacle of it all, the parades, the uniforms, the energy, could just win people over. In a time of absolute misery, the Nazis projected order, strength, and, believe it or not, hope. For a lot of people, that was intoxicating. But it wasn't all just about hope and inspiration. A huge chunk of the Nazi support actually came from a much darker place. Plain old fear. Specifically, the fear of what many people saw as the only other serious alternative. And this brings us to this really important idea in history called negative cohesion. It's when a group isn't held together by what they love or believe in, but by what they hate and what they fear. You see, tons of Germans, especially business owners and the middle class, weren't necessarily diehard Nazis. but they were absolutely terrified of a communist revolution like the one that had just happened in Russia. Yeah, and this is the key. The rise of communism was really freaking people out. This quote from a government minister at the time just captures the mood perfectly. People saw the communists fighting in the streets and heard their radical ideas, and they started looking for anyone who seemed strong enough to stop them. For a lot of people, the Nazis, with their own violent thugs, the stormtroopers, looked like the only group that could do it. It became a vote not for Hitler, but against chaos. So when you start putting all these different pieces together, you see it wasn't just one thing. It was this unique combination of factors that all came together at the exact same moment to create what you can only call a perfect storm. So let's just recap it quickly. First, you have the economic despair from the Great Depression, which makes people desperate for change. Second, you have a failing democratic government that looks completely useless. Third, into that void steps the Nazi Party with an incredible propaganda machine, a strong leader, and easy answers. And finally, you have this widespread fear of communism that pushes people who might have otherwise hated the Nazis to see them as the only option. And that really leaves us with a final and pretty timeless question, doesn't it? The story of the Nazis' rise isn't just about Germany in the 1930s. It's a really chilling reminder of what can happen anywhere when systems break down and people get scared. It forces us all to ask, when people are desperate enough, what promises are they willing to believe? And what kind of leader are they willing to follow?